Thanks very much, Ruben. Thanks everybody for coming out. For me, it's an absolute delight to be on stage again with these two. A couple of years ago now, we did much the same for their first book, and I'm very pleased to say that I've had a fair bit of involvement with both of these books, and it's been just an absolute privilege to work with these two writers. I actually want to hark back to that first novel. I'm sure many of you here read When in Broad Daylight, or Wubdiomi, as we like to call it for short. And one of the things that struck me about the new book, which, as Mervyn said, has a lovely cover, is how very different in tone it is to that first book. When in Broad Daylight opened my eyes was a stunningly suspenseful psychological thriller that explored some real darkness in the human soul. It had a dark edge to it, that book. And in this book, somehow things seem to have lightened up. It's partly a bit of a knockabout comedy. It's partly a heist. It deals with, I'm trying not to give too much away because it's got a very twisty plot. It partly deals with a plan by international organized criminals to come to Cape Town and steal a precious artifact. But the twisty plot never really overwhelms the human warmth at the heart of the book, which is about the main protagonists, who are these flawed, warm, immensely sympathetic characters. So I guess my first question is really about that shift in tone. Why so sunny for this book?
Well, the kids are a bit older now. We feel better. After the first book, people would say to us, you have such a warped sensibility. You're so cynical. Just living in the world must be such a nightmare for you. And we just want to say, well, that was sort of the mood we were in while we were writing the book, and we do have different moods. We wanted something warmer and more human. I mean, it's not a kind of really knockabout comedy. There's funny bits, we hope, but we wanted something that speaks to the heart a bit more. A lot of books, particularly nowadays, a lot of them seem to be quite dark and disturbing, and that's great. But kind of life is so hard that it's sometimes nice to have something to cheer you and give you a bit of hope.
Yeah, and I suppose, like Greg said, is this working? No. Like Greg said, with the first book, we got quite a bit of feedback from people that they were a bit disturbed that the world kind of didn't reward goodness and punish badness. And the world is like that. The world doesn't reward goodness and punish badness, unfortunately. So we thought we would try something different and create characters that we hope people will like and people will connect with, and see how people respond to that.
Yeah, sure. No, I didn't mean to suggest it was only a knockabout comedy. It certainly has quite complex elements, which I'd like to explore in more detail shortly. I mean, there are philosophical depths to the book as well, but there certainly is that lightness of touch, that comedic element, which is just so enjoyable to read. But it's certainly not unambiguous, and I think, I'm not sure who said this about the book, but it's a wonderful line. Somebody said it's an uplifting book about failure, which I think is just exactly right. Maybe it was one of you, because each of the characters are in their own way, and I'd really like you to talk about each of the characters because they are such well realized human personalities. Each of them is, in their own way, a failure in their own eyes, and has reached a point in their life where they're kind of stuck, and somehow they manage to forge a kind of a triumph out of that in the end. But maybe you could talk us through a little bit the three main characters and where they are in their lives when we meet them.
Thanks.
There's 4 characters.
There was, I guess we were intrigued by this kind of feeling that you can have kind of as you enter into middle age. This kind of beset by this feeling of failure. I mean, when I say you, I mean like I. And it's sometimes not a failure. I mean, you can of course list your particular failures, and that can take some time. But it's more than that. It's more just a sense of not having done it, not having gotten there, and sometimes you're not even sure what getting there is. But we wanted to just explore the sense of not being up to the mark in a way that had a kind of lightness about it. So one of our characters, Herschel Bloch, an overweight, middle-aged real estate assistant in Cape Town, is somebody who we feel for because Herschel he's kind of, at least at the beginning of the story, not quite getting there.
No, and what Herschel tries to do is talk himself into a better position. You know, like we're all told that if you talk to yourself, if you kind of like motivate yourself, if you kind of say the right things at the right time, things will be better. But I mean, it doesn't. So Herschel, when things go badly for him, he engages with self-talk. He says, okay, he's going to go out and he's going to make a change and things are going to be better. And it doesn't quite always work out like that for him. So that sort of appealed to us.
But
no, I mean, would you say he's a loser in some way?
You're looking at me very closely.
Just trying to get my finger on it. I mean, that feels a bit
He feels a bit like that. I mean, and there are other characters who kind of dance around this sense. So we have Sarita, a young woman who is an aspiring judo champion, and she fights. She fights for what she thinks is important, and yet she still feels she's not quite there. Something needs to change. Something more must happen.
One of her slogans is tough interior, tough exterior. And that's what she kind of uses to get herself through. But once left with the feeling that something's still not quite working for her.
At least at the beginning.
Well,
yeah.
We don't want to give spoilers away.
Yeah.
But I just want to get back to this idea of losers because, you know, I mean, a lot of the time one's kind of told, the world is kind of divided into winners and losers. And it seems such a kind of brash and crazy way to sort of look at things. And we wanted to explore the notion because, I mean, basically, at the end of the day, everybody's really a loser. I mean, life is, you can't really win at life. There is no winning play, really. And so, yeah, we wanted to look at that a bit more.
There's also well, the action is set mostly in contemporary Cape Town, but also in 18th century Cape Town. And in both situations, there is a Dutch person who comes to visit. So these are two more characters who are quite bold and who want to do particular things. I mean, South Africa has a long history of Dutch. Well, the Cape has a long exciting history of Dutch visitors wreaking havoc on us. So we wanted to introduce that part.
So let's talk a little bit about the 18th century section. I mean, this is one of the ambitious aspects of the book. I mean, you have this contemporary story revolving around contemporary people's lives, and then every now and then you dip back into the past, which is revealed through a series of letters from an 18th century Dutch man who came to visit. Could you talk a little bit about that decision to do that, to bring these chunks of the past into a contemporary book? And maybe also it might be interesting to chat a bit about what kind of depths of research you went to and how you thought about presenting that antiquated voice in the book.
Depths of research.
You
want to speak about where you got Menno from?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. This is a character who actually emerged from something some years ago. I dropped out of a creative writing course that I was taking, and I was left with a kind of a sort of tatty piece of manuscript, which Lisa and I have been pillaging ever since. And one of the characters in this manuscript, this figure, this late 1700s figure called Menno, was somebody who intrigued us, and we wanted more from him. So we developed him as one strand of this book. And he works as a kind of counterpoint to the contemporary Dutch figure and to various other events in the novel. How did we do the 18th century writing? It's a tricky and interesting process because I read quite a lot of 18th century letters from visitors to the Cape. And I mean, they were often intriguing and fascinating, and yet at the same time maybe maybe a little bit boring, in the sense that they're quite slow-paced. So we thought that writing a letter in the exact style of the 18th century wouldn't work for us. We wanted our character to be a kind of brash, lively young fellow, and his style reflects that.
Because, I mean, it is something I've noticed recently. I don't know, Lisa, maybe you want to say something about this, but there have been a couple of books in recent years which have tried to pull off this trick of transposing basically antique Dutch into modern English dialogue, which is a sort of an impossible task, but people have chosen different ways of doing it. Like I think Andre Brinkenfillede chose a particular way of writing antiquated Dutch in English. I think in the recent book Spiral House, that author too has experimented with trying ways of representing an old style of speech. Did you consider doing something like that at any point? Or?
Not really, no. We wanted the book to be entertaining and a kind of light, affirming sort of read. So we didn't want the language to be too complicated. So we modernized it really, but we still wanted to get some kind of 18th century feel coming through, which we hope we succeeded in doing.
There are a lot of ways of doing this. There's probably no right way of rendering 18th century Dutch letters, but you have to think about what you want to do with it. So, if the book had been about the massacre of the Sand in the Northern Cape in the 18th century, it would have been a different vibe and a different feeling. Yeah.
Because that would have been heavier?
Yeah, it wouldn't have, the light feel wouldn't have been able to take the weight of the theme.
No, I mean, I say that because you do indeed touch on some pretty heavy themes as well, and it's actually extremely interesting how you choose to handle those. I mean, I don't think you can write about 18th century in the Cape without touching on some pretty chilling subjects, including slavery, of course, which is a kind of a background theme to the book. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that, because you do touch on elements of oppression, of bondage, in several different ways, but with quite a light touch, and that's an interesting choice when you're talking about such a weighty issue.
I suppose we wanted to use humour. I think you can still use humour to make a serious point. I don't think if the topic is very serious that you necessarily can't do it in a kind of humorous way. And with the slavery and the oppression, we didn't want it to be too kind of deep and dark, and in both cases the characters that are drawn into the kind of slavery and the other aspect of bondage or oppression, which I don't want to go into detail about now because it will kind of spoil the book a little bit, both characters are kind of drawn in against their will, and they're not drawn in predominantly to fight slavery or the other kind of issue. They're drawn in for other reasons. They're drawn in for reasons of wanting to impress other characters that they're interested in.
They want to impress girls.
Yeah, really. That's good. We preferred a more circuitous route to get to where we wanted to go.
But also that's effective because those background issues resonate in your characters' lives, where they are all in some form of they're imprisoned in some way in their own lives. Do you think that's fair enough to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things the book is about is, of course, failure and trying to make your way out of it, and a process of self-discovery, and the other is about bondage and oppression and
stuckness. Stuckness or paralysis.
Yeah.
Not paralysis. Stuckness and paralysis. That you're in a situation that you can't get out of.
And the struggle for freedom from that. Yeah. So it's a kind of glancing, coquettish look at slavery and other kinds of oppression.
When we were talking about this earlier, you used the phrase grotesque jocularity, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, we weren't talking about ourselves. It was... I mean, there's kind of interesting ethical issues about humor and who can make the jokes and who can laugh. I mean, I think if you're kind of a slave owner and you tell a whole series of gags, or you tell some light stories about the antics of your your chained subjects, that's one thing, and there's something really distasteful about that. But I feel we can maybe get away with it. Yeah.
I mean, one of the characters who largely escapes his own stuckness, I think, is the character of Tversky. Although he too is battling personal demons in this book. I don't know how many of you remember Tversky as a character from the previous book, but he is quite a fascinating character. I'd like to talk a little bit about him. He's almost like a kind of a guru figure, also quite amoral in some ways, quite moral in some ways, a kind of a puppet master, mysterious puppet master in both of your books. And I really like the trick of bringing him back as an incidental character in this book. He's kind of the guy who really knows what's going on in both books, but we only discover that in the course of things. So where does he come from?
He came out of Greg's original manuscript from the old creative writing program that he dropped out of. But he subsequently changed, and with each kind of book he changes a little bit more. But after When in Broad Daylight, it just felt to us that he still had a lot more life in him. We wanted to explore him more. And as Henrietta says, he's a character who's kind of got a grasp on the world. He can maneuver his way through the world in a way that I suppose both of us admire. Both of us would maybe like to be a little bit more like Tversky on some level.
Yeah, I mean, Tversky's our role model, really, in a way. He changed. So originally when we thought of him, when I thought of him, he was a sort of gentle mystic, an unworldly mystic, yeah. And then he became a ruthless businessman. He used his hands, but sort of still a bit mystical. And
as I understand it, in this book he's running a kind of an import-export empire involving small perspex Buddhas.
Yes. It's the road not taken for us.
He's doing that as well as in When in Broad Daylight. Yeah.
But we really enjoyed bringing in this character from the old book, and some writers do that, and I know it's really fun when there's a writer you enjoy, and suddenly there's a character you're seeing again. Alison Lurie does that a lot, and sometimes you get the original character, or sometimes you'll get her cousin, which is fascinating too, because you notice some similarities and differences. And Anthony Powell sustains that over 12 books in A Dance to the Music of Time. So if we still feel like Tversky, again, next book we may have him, yeah. He just keeps returning.
I hope you do, but you might have blown his potential as a plot twist now, because now as soon as we see a Tversky in any of your books, we know he's the guy to keep an eye on, because he's the one who really knows what's going down.
But having said that, as you said, Henrietta, he's also got problems in the book. Nobody's escaping simply.
I think Tversky is also based on kind of a succession of... I remember childhood as dealing with a succession of aged uncles and great uncles. So it'd be family gatherings and you'd walk down the passage and a great many uncles would sort of pass by to and fro. And they always had a few words of wisdom for one. You know, you'd be stopped and told something wise. And it was not easy to understand, you know, the sort of Eastern European accent. And once you understood it, you maybe weren't so enriched. But their manner was just perfect. The manner of experience telling the young fellow how it is. It was great and memorable.
One other character we haven't talked about a lot, and again, I think we're all picking our way carefully through the plot spoilers, but is the character of Kart, who's also sometimes called Maya. She's a bit of a shapeshifter, in fact, changes her appearance utterly in the course of the book, has a secret life, has a secret history. Where does she come from in your imaginations?
She comes from Amsterdam. It's certainly for me, it's a fertile place of the imagination. I've mentioned before, my first overseas trip when I was 15 was to Amsterdam. My parents took me to a small hotel in the city centre, and the entire Amsterdam struck me as a place of of semi-naked women and bookshops. It was really a kind of paradise. A paradise of lewdness and literature. We've been back several times and have strong feelings for it. I think maybe in the South African imagination, the Netherlands as a whole occupies a really fascinating Alice in Wonderland kind of role, because their language is not quite what we can speak and understand. It's something oblique to that. And they're so different from their ancestors who arrived, with the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company, whatever they were not, liberal egalitarians. And there are other kind of through-the-looking-glass features. I mean, it's a small country and the people are so big. So the Netherlands is appealing to us. And here came this figure out of it, who's a tricksy, charming but difficult character.
Who's been in prison, it's now out of prison, but we won't go into any more details as to why, what she's getting up to in Cape Town.
So she's certainly the most glamorous Dutch person I've ever encountered.
Have you encountered people?
Quite a few. But I want to go back to, you've now actually come quite nicely to my next question by stressing this word paradise, because I think obviously that's key to the entire book. And I was hoping to unpack a little bit the title, because it recurs in the book several times. People remark, particularly in reference to Cape Town, that Cape Town is some kind of paradise, but it's a very, very ambiguous paradise, and it's only a paradise for certain people. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about the role of that word in your book.
I think the book tries to bring out that paradise is equated with freedom and a movement away from bondage and oppression.
It's something we keep returning to in our imaginations. We have on the wall of the study this beautiful picture of a beautiful old picture of a kind of pilgrim peeking his head underneath the world of appearances to discover this marvelous world behind it. And that the notion of paradise is so attractive and appealing. I mean, it's so, okay, maybe just for us, but it's so hard in everyday life to sort of scratch out a bit of happiness or content. I mean, joy is really rare. So the notion of paradise is marvelous. I mean, artists, I think, used to be more attuned to our yearning for paradise. So you get these wonderful 16th century pictures of angelic figures who are in such a state of bliss that they're hovering above the earth, touching hands or dancing together. It's wonderful to see. And now, of course, the notion is freighted with irony, and of course you must have counterpoints, but still bits of paradise peek through, and that's something we liked.
But at the same time, I think Cape Town is also quite overtly described in the book every now and then as a place, quite ironically as a paradise for, a sunny place for shady people, basically. And you obviously quite enjoy playing with this idea of various crooks and shysters from around the world congregating in Cape Town. I mean, these organized criminals from Europe seem to find Cape Town a playground. So is that something that you also quite enjoyed? This weird, slightly dirty cosmopolitanism that Cape Town has?
Yes. I mean, we write somewhere that Cape Town is a useful city for passing things through. Like a metaphor, like a straw at the end of Africa or something. Yeah. And I think Cape Town has that double appearance. I mean, Cape Town on a beautiful summer's day, it feels like everything's amazing, but there's such a seedy underbelly to the city.
I think we, as Cape Townians, we're a little bit shadier than we realize. Even the most virtuous of us. I mean, my oldest brother, who's been living in England for a number of years now, came to visit, and we were walking along the Sea Point Main Road. And there was some kind of roped off area. I think there'd been some building work. So naturally, Lisa and I kind of walked over the ropes and continued going. And he said, "What are you doing?" And it was then just that this abyss opened delightfully up between us. We felt so tough and sort of salty, dirty. It felt really great. And I think about it quite often.
And I mean, Herschel in the book, he undergoes a similar transformation when he first meets the glamorous Dutch woman. He's very obedient citizen and afraid of the world, but by the end of the book he's committing all sorts of civil disobedience himself, and that's part of his coming into his own freedom.
Yeah, he's become a bit more like the rest of us by the end of the book, you know. And I mean, one thing we had in mind for Herschel is, at least at the beginning, a certain degree of nerdiness. So I had in mind, and Lisa and I once had a conversation about high school, and she said, "Did you go to many parties in matric?" And I said, "Well, no, not really. Our class didn't really have parties. There was a class party at the end of matric, but apart from that, no one arranged any parties." And she said, no, maybe you didn't get the invitations. And I still don't believe that, but that kind of vibe was what we had in mind for Hirsch.
We wanted a nerdy but lovable character.
Hirsch does give one spectacular party in this book. I think I'm quite sure there's questions from the audience, but maybe just to round off, we've been talking about, you do seem to write about Cape Town with great affection, and I wonder if that's when you consider your next book, which I'm sure will be coming along soon. Do you think it will be in this milieu as well, or are you drawn to other places?
I think we're probably drawn to other places for the next book.
Enough of Cape Town.
I know New York has been a draw for you as well.
Sorry?
I know that you're fond of New York as well.
Yes, yeah. That's an option. I mean, I think we would like to try and write about another setting as well.
The problem is we don't know anything else. So it's like, I mean, if New York, it would be like Kafka's book on New York. Like, he'd never been there. I mean, it's all very well if you're writing about giant, anthropomorphic bugs, but if you're writing about actual people, you should know the place. But you never know. There was this interview, I feel I'm the last repository of memory of this particular interview with J.M. Coetzee many years ago, which I heard on the radio or something. I feel I should make this public. Somebody said to Coetzee something about how he felt about South Africa, and he said, "I was born here, I've lived here all my life, and I will probably die here." And then soon afterwards he moved to Perth. So you never know. I mean, I don't think we're going anywhere. For one thing, I teach philosophy, and Lisa teaches writing, so it's not like we're flush with cash. But I mean, we can go to Hermanus and stuff. But we certainly may write about other locales. Yeah.
So do we have any questions, remarks from the audience? I'm sure we do.
I just want to know, Greg, when you said...
Sorry, mine.
It's a short question.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering, when you were talking about Dutch people who visit and wreak havoc, were you talking about Richard de Nooy?
Nice.
This is Richard de Nooy is a sort of big, bold, impressive, even scary-looking writer. I don't know how much havoc he wreaks. I wasn't invited to the parties.
How do we write together?
Yeah, what's the process?
Sure. Thanks, Paige. We actually used a very different strategy for this book than we did for When in Broad Daylight. For When in Broad Daylight, we each took a character and worked with the character, and then we tried to stitch the whole thing together afterwards, which was quite a nightmare because we both of us had gone off in our own separate directions. So with Paradise, we actually employed a strategy that I think school kids sometimes do, which is that I wrote a section, say a couple of 100 words, then passed it to Greg, and then back again. And that actually worked quite well for us. I think it worked well because we were both on the same page, so to speak, no pun intended. But we knew what was in the other person's mind. I mean, that is the big danger of working together, is that it's very hard to really know somebody else's mind and know exactly, to get inside somebody else's mind is very difficult. And it was easier if we worked that way.
Yeah, our collaboration actually becomes ever closer. So for our first book, which wasn't a novel, it was a memoir really of parenting, we wrote explicitly separate chapters. One for Lisa, one for me, and so on. And the second book was a closer collaboration, and this book was really integrated. So it's actually a very beautiful story of marital bliss.
We don't fight when we write. Maybe that's why we write so much.
It's our one respite from marital combat. Yeah.